My name is Claire Glenn, and I'm supporting Homes England's local government capacity centre today. And I'm really delighted that you decided to come along to this session today. It's a series of knowledge sharing sessions on topics that you've told us that you want to hear more about. And today's event is a subject of inclusive spaces for girls and young people. Next slide, please. These programmes are brought to you by Homes England's local government capacity centre. This slide just summarises who we are and what we do. So we've launched the centre following extensive research and consultation with you across local government and with a whole range of other partners to determine where authorities need the most support and how this can best be delivered. We look forward to hearing how we did at the survey poll at the end, and then also gathering your ideas on what topics to cover in the future. So here we are, here's the agenda for today. I'll soon be handing over to Susanna Walker from Make Space for Girls, who will talk to us about inclusive spaces for girls and what we can do to make our built environment more inclusive. And then we'll go over to Jump, which is a case study in Bradford, which really brings alive what we can do and the difference that we can make through consultation as well. We'll have a question and answer session at the end, so please do, as we go along, drop all of your questions into the chat. And then just before 5 minutes towards the end, we'll have our final thoughts on reflecting on the topic itself, looking at, how we've increased our knowledge and also anything that we want to cover in the future. So I'm going to hand over now to Susanna from Make Space for Girls.
I'm Susanna Walker. I'm a trustee and co-founder of Make Space for Girls, which is a charity that campaigns for parks and all public spaces to be designed with teenage girls in mind. The implications of what that means is kind of what we'll be unpicking in the next few slides. So what we will be going through is what's the problem at the moment, why public space doesn't work for teenage girls, the implications of this, why we need to care about it, and ways in which we can do this differently. By the end of this session, hopefully you will know all these things, but it's very much going to be a whistle-stop tour because, there's all sorts of things we could say. There will be some materials coming out to support this session with lots of links and resources to further information. And Make Space for Girls is very much here to answer further questions, help you with resources, help you with advice on how to take this further. So next slide, please. So let's start with what's the problem. At the moment, parks and public spaces don't really work for teenage girls because when we provide facilities, quote, for teenagers, unquote, they're almost always the skate park, the Mooga or the basketball court, the fence pitch, the cage if you're in London, and the BMX track. All of these, for a whole host of different reasons, often end up being dominated by boys. And we need to solve this by fixing what we provide, because the temptation is to go, oh, the girls aren't on the skateboard park. Let's go and make them skateboard. And it's like, maybe that's not what they want to do. So we don't know enough about the situation at the moment. So, for example, in Sweden, we know that from the age of 8, the imbalance between boys and girls in parks was 80-20. We just don't have these stats for the UK at the moment. We are starting to get some research. York Sport have done some great research talking to both teenage girls and boys across 3 schools in Yorkshire. And 68% of the teenage girls felt there was nothing for them to do in the parks. 59% of them didn't feel welcome in parks because the spaces were dominated by boys. And girls really know there's a problem. Girl Guiding did a survey on this a few years ago, and 82% of girls thought they should be more involved in designing parks and public spaces. A big part of this, and we'll get onto this in a bit, is safety and feeling uncomfortable. The YWCA did some great research in Glasgow, and of women and girls who use parks, and this was during COVID, so people were very invested in their local parks and they'd chosen which one to go to, and even so only 20% felt very comfortable in their chosen park. And in some work done by a park in York, 90% of girls who skateboarded didn't feel comfortable in the skate park. So we have a problem. And just to drill down a bit into why we have a problem with skate parks and Moogers. Moogers in particular, they're the most common thing that we provide with for teenagers, so common that nobody knows how many there are. But nobody's actually researched who uses them. We looked at one over a weekend, and only 5% of the users were girls. Then the design is a big part of that problem. They're fenced spaces with narrow entrances, so they're easily territorialized, and they are also don't feel safe for girls. I mean, to be honest, as a grown woman, if it was a Mooger with multi-use games area full of boys with narrow entrances and high fencing, I don't think I'd go in. Skate parks get dominated in a similar way. We know a bit more about skate parks. We know, for example, that 85% of skateboarders are male. And from talking to skateboarders, we also know that boys often drive girls away. You talk to girl skateboarders, they will go in the morning to avoid the boys. This is teenagers getting up early in the morning out of choice. They've had stones thrown at them. They've had names called. In the worst cases, they've had rape threats. So boys tend to dominate the space. But one thing that's really good about both Moogers and skate parks is that for teenage boys, they provide a sign that they're welcome, because we have a tendency to want to clear away teenagers in general for loitering. Which we don't say. We don't say, old people, you're loitering on benches, go away. So we need to slightly get over ourselves. But Moogers and skate parks provide really good spaces where boys can go and know that they are welcome, that they're not going to be told to go somewhere else. So the really big question is, how do we make a sign for girls to create something where they are welcome? So next slide, please. So why does this need to change? One is just basic fairness and equality. Of course, girls should have facilities in parks. And it's important beyond just going to parks, because to be in public space is to be part of the community. And otherwise, our parks and public spaces are saying to girls, which they do at the moment, you belong at home. And I can't really get behind that. Health. I'm going to come on to that in a bit because it's so important. Inactivity, really bad for your health, has particular implications for teenage girls. Safety. Safety is one of the biggest barriers for girls going to parks, and they have a right to feel safe and to, be able to go out and about without being worried. At the moment, it's really clear from the research that fear of attack, and also for teenage girls, feeling safe isn't just about, I'm not going to be raped, I'm not going to be attacked, which is kind of the grown-up perception. It's also about not being judged, about feeling that they're not welcome in spaces. There's been a really great research project in Leeds talking to women and girls about safety in public parks, and I really commend that to you as a way of sort of understanding that subject. And then the law. I'm not going to go into this into detail, but it is really important. The UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which the UK has signed up to, under Article 31, every child under the 18 has a right to play. And we are, at the moment, not really providing that for teenage girls. More crucially, for councils and other public bodies, the Equality Act 2010 and the public sector equality duty under that asks councils and any other public bodies not just to consider equality when they're making a decision, but to act to redress inequality. And so we would argue that when you start to look at park and public space provision through that lens, there is a very clear inequality, and that it's something that needs to be looked at and changed. Now, we have produced a Q&A in association with a law firm specifically about how the public sector equality duty applies in these circumstances. So that is also part of the resources that will be available after this. And I'll go back to talking about this in a minute. So next slide, please. So teenage girls and health. Teenage girls are less active than teenage boys at every age stage. But we never seem to connect that up with the fact that we don't give them anything to be active on, and simply going to the park increases their activity levels. The research is clear on this, and it's kind of obvious, really. If you're going to the park, you're not sitting on the sofa chatting to your mates on the phone. This is good. It doesn't have to be all about doing sport, because one of the things that teenage facilities tend to focus on quite a bit is sport. So we've got the football pitch and the skateboard area, and it's all about doing sport. For some teenage girls and some teenage boys, that's not what they want. They want play spaces. They want to hang around with their mates. They want to mess about. They don't want to do something organized. And it's really important to recognize that sporting facilities are not the only need for teenagers. But the other really important thing is mental health. The research is getting to be really clear now that access to green space, even in quite a small quantity, so 15 minutes twice a week, has a significant effect on low mood and anxiety. It's also really clear that girls are suffering from mood disorders much more severely than boys. One recent piece of research put it at 3 times the amount. So there's such a clear public health benefit in getting teenage girls into parks, and it has the potential, or at least we need to try it, to be a significant intervention. So that's that, really. Oh, and just as a sort of side note, because of this health benefit, because I know that one of the issues for so many councils is just a lack of funding to make changes in parks, but the active partnerships are really interested in this work, and they're really interested in creating active landscapes which reach harder to reach groups like teenage girls. So that's just a thought. So next slide, please. This is part of the Yorkshire research that I mentioned, and it's just really interesting. So this is what girls want from parks. And the number one is swings. And this comes through, we do lots of workshops with teenage girls, and this comes through all the time, that they want big swings that can swing high. And swings, incidentally, are actually quite a good source of moderate activity. It's not just, it's just a piece of playground equipment. It's good activity. What's really worth noting is that multi-use games areas and skate parks don't score that well. They're not what girls want to find in parks. They're not what's going to draw them to parks. The other thing that's really key is play adventure equipment for people my age. When there's been a really great piece of work in Brent, working with both boys and girls, where they produced a manifesto for what they wanted from public spaces. And one of the things was, we want to play, but we don't want to be where the little kids are. So it needs to be a differentiated zone where they feel they own it and they can play on it. What's interesting is that when the boys were surveyed, that the multi-use games areas and skate parks didn't do that well either. And play adventure equipment for people my age also scored quite well. And it's one of the things that's really worth saying. Although we are a group that focuses on girls, partly because of the Equality Act and the fact that, that there is a clear equality issue, but actually lots of other groups benefit when you do this work. It's not just about creating spaces for girls, because when you create a range of different, more interesting facilities, what you get are spaces that work for the boys who don't feel good about going onto the Mooga, the boys who don't want to play football, the boys who don't want to skateboard, the LGBTQA teenagers who also feel that the Mooga isn't a safe space for them. You're creating benefits all round, not just for girls, but girls will benefit. What does better look like? I could literally do a 20-minute presentation just about that, because the good news is that in Europe, there has been a lot of great work talking to teenage girls, co-designing stuff with teenage girls, creating spaces which work for teenage girls and which the results show are used by them. There's lots on our website. So, please do go and look. There's some, and they're not all expensive. There's a great piece of work in Bredang in Sweden, which is just on the space of a Mooga, co-designed with teenage girls. And it's, it divides it up into different spaces. So what are the key things that matter to teenage girls? Better lighting and circular paths. This is all about safety. Lighting, obviously key for safety, but it needs to be done with some subtlety, because if you just put big floodlights on a Muga, what you're actually doing is creating areas of darkness that feel more unsafe around the Muga. Circular paths, weirdly, this is something that is enormously backed up by research. Circular paths feel safe because the one thing that girls don't like is dead-end paths, because you might get trapped. And being trapped is a big part of the safety work they're doing all the time. But they also, walking paths and jogging paths around the perimeter of a park, because perimeters feel safer as well, have been shown to significantly increase activity levels in parks and to attract women and girls. So quite a simple solution. And the other thing is breaking things down into smaller areas. If I wanted designers to take one single thing away from this presentation, it would be that. The more different areas you create separated from each other, the more different groups can use a space at the same time, because that in the end is one of the problems with Mugas and skate parks. One group can dominate. Even with a skate park, if you break it down into different areas, there's potential for more groups to be able to use it at the same time. But we need to think about the whole park that way. Sociable seating, that wasn't on the Yorkshire Sport questionnaire, because that was about what would help you be more active in the park. But girls want social seating, and by social seating they mean they want to face each other when they can speak, when they're speaking to each other. Because there's one brilliant bit of feedback, a girl just said, well, we hate the current park benches because it means one of us always has to get a gravelly bum. So it's a really simple thing. They want to be able to face each other. Hanging about, not just swings, although swings are, as we've said, really, 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 really good. Simple gym bars. There was a park in Sweden that was designed entirely by teenage girls, and that was one of the things they requested. Not high pull-up bars, but just the kind of gym bars that used to be in every park 40 years ago, where you can swing over and do somersaults and literally just hang around. Hammocks are also really, really popular. Performance spaces, because doing a TikTok dance is A, a good thing, B, it's also activity. There's been some really nice work in Vienna where the local girls were spoken to, and they said, we want a stage. And it's a community asset. You know, it's bringing people into the park, but, you know, it's something that they can use. And what's interesting is in that case, they've labeled it in German, which I'm not going to pretend I can speak very well, the girls' stage. So it's acting as that sign I spoke about earlier for girls that they can use the space. And good quality toilets. I know that this is they're problematic, that there are expenditure issues, that there are maintenance issues, but there is really clear research that shows that parks are more used and more actively used by teenagers where there are good quality toilets. And most teenage girls, as they're dealing with periods, have a stage at some point in their life, in their teenage life, where they don't want to be more than 20 minutes from a toilet. So it's really important. Next slide, please. So, as well as design, there are lots of other ways that councils can think about equality, mostly by embedding it into your strategies. So the play and open spaces strategy, if that says facilities for teenagers, for example, Mugas and skate parks, maybe it needs looking at, maybe it needs examining to see how different excluded groups can be included in the park and included in the guidance. We know that the Fields and Trust guidance is a big source of that, and they are currently consulting on how to make it more inclusive. But councils at every stage can have a look at their play and open spaces strategy and see whether they are thinking about all groups in facilities for teenagers. Sports and pitches. This is a big one that we're only just starting to unpick. A lot of councils will have a playing pitch strategy. But what's fascinating about playing pitch strategies is that the data, for a change, we have some data. And it shows that very clearly pitches are on average 93% used by men and boys rather than women and girls. So yes, we might get a bit of uplift from the Lionesses, but that is still a massive, massive amount of space that is mostly being used by men and boys. And we have to ask, what else are we providing for women and girls? And quite often the answer is nothing. So we need to look at that. And there's also in that just a little tag to the thought of gender budgeting, which is starting to come through in a number of places. Because if you gender budget pitches, you'll find that you're looking at 350,000 for facilities that are used by men and boys and only 25,000 or so for women and girls. So it suddenly becomes quite a stark choice. Supplementary planning guidance. Now, Caroline Woodley from Hackney is here and can talk about this in the questions later, because Hackney have done a really good job of creating child-friendly supplementary planning guidance, which encodes all sorts of things into the guidance so that developers and anybody who is thinking about public spaces has to include them, and that's really important. So please do talk to that. Make sure tenders don't perpetuate inequality. For example, we were asked about whether we could help create a more inclusive MUGA, and we looked at the tender, and the tender said the MUGA had to be in a specific place, which was by a wall in the furthest corner of the park, 20 metres from the path, and it had to have 3-metre high fencing. So to which we go, well, no, you've created you've already asked for a space that can't be made inclusive. So look at the tenders, think about what you're asking for as standard and see if it can be made more equal. Collect data. Because without data, we don't know firstly, we don't really know what the problem is, but we also can't evaluate changes. Now we are, and I'm happy to talk about this later if anybody's interested, we're going to do a kind of citizen science data collection thing in late spring called Park Watch, where hopefully we're going to get people across the country to gather data on who's using the teenage facilities in their local parks. There's a whole lot of other stuff I could say, particularly around consultation and talking to teenage girls who know their own area and are real experts on it, but I am running out of time. But please do get in contact with us, speak to us, ask questions, but we're around later to talk about all of this. And now I am going to hand over to the JUMP project and specifically to Sally Barber, who have been doing some really, really interesting work on including a range of all sorts of different groups, including teenage girls, in activity and in parks and public spaces. So thank you very much.
That's great. Thank you so much, Susanna. Lovely to be here today, and thank you very much for the invite. And we're really happy to come and talk to you about the work that we've been doing in Bradford. So my name is Dr. Sally Barber. I lead our physical activity research group here at Bradford Institute for Health Research. And we're part of a partnership organisation called Active Bradford. And Active Bradford applied to be one of the Sport England funded local delivery pilots. So we're really fortunate to be able to have received funding to take a whole systems approach to increasing physical activity for children, young people. And the group that we're focusing on are 5 to 14-year-olds in 8 geographical neighbourhoods across the north of Bradford. And those are some of the most deprived neighbourhoods in the city. So I'll just sort of give you a bit of context, and then I'm going to pass on to my colleagues to talk more specifically about the research and the work that we've been doing with teenage girls. So our local delivery pilot is called JUMP, which stands for Join Us Move Play. And when we started developing JUMP, we looked at kind of what themes we needed to focus on. So we came out with 5 themes. Those are policy and strategy, environment, communities, organisations, children and families. So we have a range of interventions that fit into those different 5 themes. What we're talking about today is the environment theme. So please can we have the next slide? So our environment theme focuses on developing and regenerating urban green spaces and activating those green spaces for children and young people. In our JUMP project, we have various key principles, but 2 of our key principles are taking an evidence-based approach to designing and developing and delivering the work that we're doing, and crucially ensuring community voice in everything that we do. And by taking these 2 approaches around evidence-based working and working with communities, this enables us to design the best solutions possible for our children and young people, particularly taking into consideration local context. and it also gives us sort of the greatest likelihood of the greatest effects as well. So the research question that we're sort of focusing on is, can green spaces be co-designed to increase the usage of and improve health outcomes for adolescent girls? So when we set about this work, focusing on teenage girls specifically, we did some work looking at barriers and facilitators to adolescent girls using their local green spaces. And we also designed up a co-design workshop where we're able to talk to the girls about what they would like to see in those spaces. So I'm going to pass you on to Mariam, who's one of our research fellows here at Born in Bradford, and to Caroline, who's one of our community engagement managers working for Jump, to talk you through the process of that sort of research and the co-design, and some of the challenges that we've met along the way, and also some of the successes. So I'm going to pass you on to Mariam now. And could we have the next slide, please?
Hi, everybody. So my name's Mariam, and I'm a research fellow over at Jump. And in the last year, I've been responsible for delivering the Green Space for Girls research programme. So at Jump, we've adopted a multi-method approach to develop quantitative and qualitative insights into how locals engage their green space. Sport England agreed to fund the green space developments linked to, as Sally explained, increased physical activity and wellbeing outcomes. So within our approach, we adopted qualitative and quantitative methods. So for the qualitative research, we held citywide focus group discussions with girls and parents to contextualise their relationship with green spaces. We wanted to understand more about their interactions and how they use the spaces on a regular basis. And the qualitative interviews that we used in the focus groups were aligned to the COM-B model. This approach enables us as the research team to identify what needs to change in order for a behaviour change to be effective. So in focus group discussions, both parents and adolescents describe physical and conceptual barriers to accessing green space. For example, A-frames that prevent wheelchair or pushchair access, or concerns or evidence of antisocial social behaviour that put people off from accessing certain green spaces. But overwhelmingly, all groups made strong links to mental and physical well-being within the green spaces. We've got more focus groups planned as we round up the study to evaluate co-design and co-production approach to green spaces. So we've also used the co-design and co-production workshops. So my colleague Caroline will provide more in-depth examples of the workshop on the stakeholder stakeholder engagement process. But in summary, we planned and delivered the workshops in collaboration with Make Space for Girls. And we delivered the research within 3 Jump areas identified as in need of green space development. In the workshops, we invited adolescent girls aged between 11 and 15 to assume the role of landscape architect for their local green space development. We took a strategic approach to shift the power balance to the girls. So when planning the workshops, we adopted power sharing principles and invited the girls to influence, shape and inspire green space design based on their day-to-day experience. At the beginning of each workshop, the girls were informed that they are the experts, and our role as researchers was to learn from them. Our vision was to create a relaxed environment for girls where they are invited to work in friendship groups and create their vision of inclusive space. Our initial 3-hour workshop is made up of group activities in which the girls are invited to discuss their relationship with green space, how they have changed from when they were small children to how they feel in green spaces now. We accompanied the girls on a green space visit to the local park that's being developed, where they can envisage the space through their eyes, through the lens of a designer. Now, this has been followed, the park visit is then followed up with a very lively creative arts and crafts session, where the girls can create either mood boards or models, arts and crafts models on large maps of the green space that's being developed. Now, throughout the series of workshops, we applied a test and learn approach, by evaluating the feedback from the girls, and accordingly we made tweaks to suit their preferences for future workshops. The feedback we received from the girls has been very positive in this regard. As for the quantitative research, we use NEST, which is Natural Environment Scoring Tool, designed to evaluate the quality of green and blue spaces across 8 domains. So that's accessibility, recreation facilities, amenities, natural or non-natural aesthetics, significant natural features, incivilities, and usability. And this would generate a quality score. Admittedly, NEST is more suited to larger parks, but the tool is tried and tested, and the measures are nonetheless useful for generating an indicative quality score. We also use SOPARK, which is the system of evaluating play and recreation in communities. It's regarded as the gold standard in terms of park audits, and SOPARK is designed to capture generalized low-level data about park users through different timeframes during the weekday and the weekend, by approximate age, gender, by ethnicity, and within certain target areas of the green space, and by the type of activity that's been undertaken, which is categorized by sedentary, light physical activity, and moderate to vigorous physical activity. So our colleague, Mikel Subiza Perez, used propensity score matching to identify control parks for each intervention park, using data from park audits conducted previously with the NEST tool. Now, for the sake of scientific validity, control parks were required to be inside Bradford, but outside of the jump intervention area. Prior to any developments, we've collected baseline data for each green space and plan to repeat the data collection this summer after the parks have been developed. The result of the pre-post intervention analysis will be described in a paper to be written in the second half of this year. And finally, we use the youth evaluation tool. Designed with young people as part of a study in Canada, the youth evaluation tool rates the park access and features with a scoring system informed by the preferences of 13 to 19-year-olds. Similar to NEST, the park is assessed by auditors to generate a score. All the quantitative assessments will be undertaken again post-implementation to help validate the effectiveness of the interventions. All this research is currently being analysed by our senior research fellow Amanda Seams, with 2 papers to follow, which will include findings and recommendations, and a funding application underway to evaluate the impact of co-designed green spaces on mental health of adolescent girls living near the space. Thank you. I'll now hand you over to my colleague Caroline.
Thank you, Mariam. Hi. So I'm Caroline, Community Engagement Manager for Jump. So as Mariam mentioned, we had 3 workshops to engage the girls in the co-design process, and these were local girls aged between 11 to 15. It was important that the workshops were fun and playful, and as the group bonded and got to know each other. We also included a visit to the park to help them consider the wider context, the wider social context in terms of space, existing park features, and other park users. We then gave the girls time to explore their own thoughts and experience of parks, especially the barriers and the enablers to accessing green space. We then invited the girls to create mood boards of features that they would like to see in the park. Could we have the next slide, please? So they were encouraged to be creative and to do some blue sky thinking, and we purposefully did not invite landscape architects to this session as we wanted them to create without constraints. These are examples of the mood boards, and key themes identified from these, oh, there we are, were that the designs were aesthetically pleasing, with nature colour, social seating, lighting, community gardens, swings, hammock, parkour equipment, and gym bars. So the workshop output was then shared with the landscape architect from the local authority to produce 3 design options based on the key themes identified by the girls. So the landowner of the site is a social housing association. And while they did support the project, the budget for maintaining the equipment was limited, so it was essential that the designs were robust. We then invited the girls back to a second co-production workshop where we shared 3 designs with the same group of girls. And the local architect attended this workshop. And the girls were invited to provide feedback and vote for their favourite features and overall design. We then consulted the local residents through mail out and through door knocking and invited them along to a fun day in the park to engage the wider community. It was very interesting to hear from the local residents. While they were really happy about the development, a lot of the feedback was, what's the point? It's just going to get ruined and nothing lasts long around here. So it was clear that we had our work cut out for us in a community where assets have been stripped away and deprivation is high and aspirations are low. And the Housing Association made it clear that if equipment was vandalised, they might not be able to replace it, which would lead to a further sense of loss for the community. From our experience, it is key that community readiness is key, and an approach where we can create something to build on would be better. Something that the community can take ownership of so that we're doing with rather than to. So the final design, when all this was taken into consideration, was scaled back a little and made from pretty indestructible stuff. We then invited the girls back to a third workshop where we shared the plans and provided the rationale for the final design and discussed the next steps in terms of development and activation. The scheme will be built and ready for use in late spring, and the girls have expressed that they want to get involved with the development by planting trees and plants for the community garden and co-create the artwork. They also wanted to help us decide on what ongoing activities they would like to see happening there to encourage positive use and animate the site and to support an opening celebration. And also some of the residents have expressed that they'd like to be part of a Friends of group, perhaps become a constituted group able to access funding for events and more equipment further down the line, which the council officers would support. So it's clear it's just the beginning there, but I'm really looking forward to seeing the plans come into fruition. Thank you. I hand over to Susanna again, I think.
I think we can come back to me for the Q&As now. Thank you. That's absolutely brilliant and fascinating to see how through the case studies, what we do through consultation actually makes these spaces more inclusive. So what we can do, we've had quite a few people asking to look at your website and everything, so we can share that so they can see what you've actually put in place. So it's been absolutely brilliant. We've had lots of comments in the chat, lots of things that we can explore. So one of the first questions I was just gonna ask, and Susanna, if it's okay, I'll come to you. Someone put in the chat that they've got a local park that sounds really, really well serviced. So it's got a Mooga, a skate park, small toddler playground, and then it's got an area for teenagers. So it's got equipment, hammocks, large swing, roundabout. Sounds brilliant. But the local Facebook page is full of residents moaning about teenagers hanging out in the park. So, you know, what can we do to kind of make that provision for teenagers, but also encourage the community to accept them as well?
Yes, it's a really interesting piece of work. And although we are Make Space for Girls, we sometimes end up being just advocates for teenagers because absolutely nobody else is. I think we basically have to get over ourselves. And I know that's easier said than done, but to point out to, you know, if it's a friends group complaining, if it's parents complaining, that teenagers have a right to be in the park and they have a right to play. And what's really crucial, I think, particularly today, teenagers have no autonomous space apart from public space. They're not autonomous at school. They are not autonomous at home. And if we expect them to grow up into independent adults with judgment and the ability to, you know, be fully grown up people, then we have to give them space to mess around and make mistakes. And yes, teenage play looks like loitering, hanging around on the roundabout, all of that kind of thing. And we need to just accept that. However, I think one crucial thing is about where you put things. It's a fine line between, you need to put spaces for teenagers where they are well observed so that they don't get dominated by a group, so that they feel safe. But it's also really crucial to separate that from the little kids space enough, and the teenagers themselves know that. There's a great, I can't remember which bit of research it's in, but there's a girl who just basically says, yeah, we need a separate space because I don't want to be on the little kids equipment in case I accidentally let out a swear. And they said they know, you know, so it's about creating a space that clearly signals it's for teenagers, which clearly skate parks and moogers do, and finding a way of making that clear to people. Somebody suggested, and I think it's a really good idea, because there are all those no children over 12 signs. Why don't we have a no children under 12 area of the park? Just let's put the signs up on it.
And just a follow-up question on that, we're looking at who else do we need to consult in all of this. So, there's people asking, how do we get the message across to children, maybe through PE teachers in school? Are these places policed? How do we bring the community together to make sure that when we do provide these services to children, that everyone's on board? Is it about not just consultation with teenage girls, but consultation with the entire communities as well?
I think I would argue quite strongly that we need to consult with teenage girls, because at the moment they don't see themselves as park users. They're so alienated from public space that they just don't believe it's for them. And so you actually have to work quite hard to talk to teenage girls. And, if you're just talking to the friends group, then you're not really ever going to get the voices of the non-users there. I think probably the key is communication. And, whether that's through newsletters, whether that's through actual labeling of bits of space, that it's okay. And, about a little bit of pushback, maybe. I think Caroline wanted to say something about this as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that a big part of the work that we're doing, as we said, with the design process is one element of it, but a key part of it is animating the site once it's built. So we've got jump connectors in role, and they will deliver activities in the park, and we're asking people what they want to see happening there. So it's just important that it lands well, so that it doesn't become a place that's used for antisocial behaviour, that it is used in a positive way. So that is something that, like we said, that's something that's key, a real key part of it.
And just to add on that point as well, in terms of the sort of qualitative research findings that we've had, I mean, if we take away, so if we take into consideration who are your Facebook users and the demographic, in our engagement sessions with young girls, we found that they don't see themselves as people who just exist in a silo. They are part of a community, and inevitably, especially in socially deprived areas, girls will find themselves as carers for elderly parents or grandparents, and they are also aware of the cost of living crisis. They're also carers for younger siblings. They're very much aware of inclusivity as a whole in terms of access for wheelchair users, and all of this is part and parcel of how their context is framed now. So part of their designs, as Caroline showed you in their work in the mood boards, reflect what's important to them. So community gardens with edibles, social seating, which is not exclusively for teenage girls, it's for the whole of the community. And they really do want to bring back a whole community spirit with the projects that we've engaged with. So it's not just about them. I think, voices like Facebook can sometimes polarize that view of, who are the park users, and, polarize opinion. So really getting into green space and getting, being present in that green space will inevitably result in positive, change.
Absolutely, yeah. A lot of the chat is talking about, how all of these things are really positive. People would encourage them in their local parks and want to see them, but good design also costs money. I know we've got Caroline Woodley on the call as well. In my experience, sometimes we have a lot of goodwill, and we also have a lot of stakeholders with different pots of funding. So Sports England, local authorities, all wanting to do the right thing. How do we go about coordinating all of those things to make them happen and delivering this type of space?
Is that a question for me?
Caroline, if you could come in, because I know you
Yeah.
you will have had experience of this, and talk about, you know, what your experience is and how we overcome those barriers of people working together.
Yeah, really, really pleased to come in. This has been a really interesting set of presentations. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm the London Borough of Hackney Cabinet Member for Families, Parks and Leisure. So I have quite an interesting brief that cuts across education, it cuts across SEND and inclusion. And a large part of my area of my work is around making Hackney a more child-friendly borough. And when we talk about making a place more child-friendly, we're actually ensuring that it'll be friendly for all ages as well. We've got a big investment into intergenerational play. So it's quite interesting to me hearing you talk about how you bring younger children, teenage children, older people together who actually all have one thing in common, and that is that often they don't feel welcome or safe in anywhere. So that whole sort of incentive to make sure that people feel that they have a place to be, have a right to be, runs through the core of pretty much every aspect of my work as a cabinet member. I've noticed in the chat a lot of people sort of talking about a lack of investment and engagement and consultation. Well, that's at present, we're still managing to make that a priority actually in Hackney, to do that consultation work and that engagement work. And it's actually through an engagement exercise that I got to meet the sort of inspiring people from Make Space for Girls, because we had an opportunity to deliver a day of workshops with a local school, Clapton Girls, which was looking at particularly at girls with special educational needs. Although we know that often boys are subject to exclusions educationally, in terms of actually being kind of removed from education, often girls almost have like an in-class exclusion, particularly if they're autistic. There's a masking, there's a sort of an attempt to fit in and to not cause disruption that can almost exclude them in a different kind of way. So I think there's been a sort of focus in my work and in the work that Make Space for Girls was doing to actually hear from them and help this particular group to shape place as well. And what was really interesting is that when we met with them, we did a walkabout in a park called Millfields, and they told us some of the things that have been touched on already in this presentation, and that perhaps don't feel that surprising, that they like the river, the grass and basketball hoops, the wildflowers, the open space. It has a lot of space and lots of things to do. But on the left side, the positive side, this chimes a lot with what's been said already as well, that there is a lot of dark places that are covered by trees, sketchy people hang around there. There's a lot of people who are drunk sitting on the benches and acting inappropriately. It is overpopulated with people and litter. And they would like to see more benches, more picnic tables, more light, free fruit. There was a community orchard that we walked around that they were really excited about, more teenage equipment and cleaner benches. And I think this is something that we have picked up as we've done some wider consultation work. I mean, we had a huge investment in consultation around Shoreditch Park, a really large park in Hackney. And in a park like that, where we actually had some funding to put into the regeneration of the area, we were able to tackle a lot of the things that have come up in the chat. So we have a leisure centre at its heart, which has changing places, it has accessible toilets, it has a cafe, it has that sort of safe place to rest, sit, use the facilities that I think a lot of people are saying, if they're not available in a park, can make them quite unfriendly spaces. The idea of a teenage girl who's menstruating to not be able to access a public convenience when she's out playing, you know, that's a real challenge. There is investment in Muggers, and I take on board all the points made about how Muggers can be dominated by boys. But because we've been engaging with girls in particular, we've thought about how to make the Mugger more girl friendly, whether it's the colour scheme of the grounds, whether it's ensuring that there's opportunities to do with sort of more performative play. We've looked at older play space to sit alongside younger play space, biodiversity, rewilding, planting areas, chatty benches. There was lovely sort of chat about sort of seating. And to some extent, we've tried to please everybody. I think 2,000 people responded to our consultation, which is unusual, I have to say. But Shoreditch Park is a large park and a lot of people had strong feelings about it. And we've tried to sort of meet the needs for everybody. But there is always that danger that I think Suzanne spoke about really well, that if you're pleasing everybody, that space can be dominated by some. So you have to be really careful and check back that it's working and that it's operating well, and to bring young people back into those public spaces, because if you don't have them telling you from their own lived experience of how it actually is to be in those parks, then you can't adjust, you can't adapt, you can't make it better. I really like that somebody spoke in the chat about having I think it might have even been you, Suzanne, about having a bank of swings sitting together, swings that appeal to all ages. And the idea that they're a place to sit and chat, absolutely agree with that. That getting out there, feeling comfortable, feeling like you belong, that you can chat and enjoy yourself, should be available to those younger people as well. You can see I'm overexcited and want to go on and on. I could talk more about the child-friendly places supplementary document. I've popped a link in the chat, and I'll pop it in again. If you search Vienna, you'll find the study that Suzanne referred to earlier, where there was engagement with young girls and how that shaped that space. And none of it's rocket science. And actually, it's not too difficult for us to do as councils. We're investing in play areas all the time. They come to end of life. And for the sake of health and safety, you have to invest in them. You can't necessarily do everything that everybody wants, but you can really think about those stakeholders that are missing out and make sure that they're no longer missing out.
Thank you, that's great. And I think it's really important to remember that, you know, not all girls are the same. Different subsets of girls want different things in different areas as well, which kind of shows up in our case study. We have had a question come through about has anyone done any work on how we include girls with disabilities or and other challenges into these spaces as well? Caroline, have you got any background on that, or Susanna?
Well, to some extent, that walkabout that I described with Susanna was doing exactly that with that group of autistic girls. We have a SEND pupil forum with the play areas that we've just consulted on in Hackney. We invited a pupil forum from Stormont House, which is a special school that sits right overlooking Hackney Downs. And I went along to meet the pupil forum, and I was expecting sort of half a dozen children carefully steered by teachers. There were 30 kids there, and oh my goodness, they had a lot to say, and it was great. You know, we were able to take a lot of information away, and we are implementing some of their feedback into our design. So, you know, it's real and it can happen. And we have a sort of a policy in Hackney of a sort of you said, we did. So we try and collect the information that we're given or the feedback that we're given. We can't do it all, so we try and be honest about that, but we also try and show what we have done.
Perfect, thanks.
I think the other thing I'd add to that is that I think two things. One is that not all disabilities are the obvious ones. And so we, for example, spoken to parents of older children with autism who also find swings a really good way to access parks, for some of them, as a means of self-regulation. So they have the same issues as the girls because they are seen as being out of place on the swings for small children. And there's a really brilliant I'm not saying we shouldn't think of these things all the time. Obviously we should, but there's a great American concept of the curb cut effect. Whereas in Berkeley, in California in the 60s, where there were the first demands from people in wheelchairs to put the dropped curbs. So particularly because Berkeley is incredibly hilly. So this happened. It was done. And 9 months later, they went back to evaluate the effects of putting these dropped curbs in. And what they discovered is that they were used by all sorts of people, not just by wheelchairs. So they were used by people with pushchairs. They were used by blind people. They were used by people who just use sticks. So many people found them a benefit. And the more you create inclusive spaces in parks, you end up including, and it's what, I can't remember whether it's Caroline or Jump talking about this, you know, if you put social seating in, everyone's going to use it. You know, all sorts of different people are going to use it in different ways. And so we just need to think outside the box of what we're currently providing and to think more inclusively across the board.
Yeah, absolutely. There's also been a comment come in about, you know, we're talking about including children into these spaces through good design, but the fear is the antisocial behaviour and how we police that. But how do we define antisocial behaviour? What is antisocial behaviour in these areas?
That's a really good question. Sometimes it's quite obvious, and sometimes antisocial behaviour is the dominance by one particular group, and it is almost a kind of territorialization, a get off my land. But one of the there is a skate park company who one of the pitches for their skate parks is that it massively reduces antisocial behaviour. And they make reference to one particular skate park, which I'm not going to name because then you can find them, where there was a 30% decrease in antisocial behaviour. Yes, because the antisocial behaviour was skateboarding down the steps of the police station. So obviously the police were quite keen for that not to happen. So I think one thing you have to think about antisocial behaviour is it actively antisocial, or is it in the wrong place? And should, because actually what we're doing with skateboarding is just actually putting it in a place where we see people not being a nuisance. So the other thing that is just a question that we have no idea about at the moment, but if you bring more teenagers into park, because at the moment it's the most dominant teenagers who potentially are going to be the more disruptive ones, that if we make parks feel safer and invite all teenagers in, maybe people will become more tolerant of teenagers because you're not just getting the antisocial ones in. But I don't know. This is something that we desperately need to experiment with.
Absolutely, yeah, thank you. And just a question about CCTV as well. We probably don't have the answer to this, but does it help or hinder? If I was a teenage girl, would I want CCTV in a park, or would I feel like I was being spied on, or would I feel more comfortable with it there? Has there been any study on this, or any of the girls that you've spoken to have had any comment on it?
I've put this into the chat, but the research that Leeds University have done about women and girls' safety in parks is the best research we've got at the moment, and the jury is out on CCTV. Because it helps with prosecutions. It doesn't necessarily help with actually making you feel safer in the moment. What did come up more strongly was help points as being a potential solution where you can get immediate attention. But this is literally the first bit of significant, proper research into it. And I think that's an area that needs a lot more unpicking, is how technological solutions can help with park safety. However, the one thing I would say, and this is really important, is that there are other forms of surveillance are available. For example, particularly in London parks, where things like dog walkers and personal trainers can be seen as things you have to make pay, but they are potentially surveillance in parks. So to think about who the people are who might be, if you like, human CCTV, but who are a human who can intervene as well.
Brilliant. Caroline, have you got any comment on that? I've got another question about developers as well, if you want to come in on that one.
Sorry, I'd just like to say that we did a small social science experiment where we used some technology called the Urban Eye Box in a green space with a group of teenagers, girls and boys. And what was really interesting is that they were completely uninterested in technology as some form of securitization within green space. They didn't think it would make them feel safer. And I think the context is that they're growing up in a digital age, and they know that if they feel unsafe, they can pull out their phone and they can either call for help or they can start recording something. So the kind of relationship that young people especially have with technology is quite different to people who are of an age of decision making. So keeping them included in that process. But again, a lot of the themes coming out from children or young people are that they don't want to be told how to behave. They don't want to be, and that's why they feel safe in green spaces, because they don't have these constraints and boundaries. So yeah, it's just really interesting to see how young people view technology, security, and how they define antisocial behaviour as well. Sally, did you?
No, I was just what you were saying.
Thank you. So the question about developers that came into the chat is a really interesting one. So, in terms of development, we do know developers spend on a large scale development, and it's largely due to planning conditions as well, that they spend a lot of money on sports pitches. So maybe up to 3 million on an all-weather pitch, which only a small minority of people actually will use. So how do we change the mindset of sport being paramount and require equitable spending for all of the people who are using that outdoor space in the built environment?
Oh, there's a lot to unpick there. Right, we'll go through this in stages. Firstly, developers. We actually find that developers are really keen to engage and create more equitable spaces, which is great. We're working with a number of them. They are funding research. They are listening to us. They are responding to us by organising consultations with teenage girls, which is great. And there is a reason for it, because they want to create communities that last, you know, just as everybody here does. And they can see that as well as social value, you know, there is actual added value for their developments if they create a space that families want to stay in, where people are living together in public space in a more equal way. So develop, you know, it's, if you speak to them, you will quite often find, I think, that they will be receptive to these ideas. However, the pitches are another question, because quite often a lot of councils have in their development guidance that for X number of houses, you have to create X hectares of pitches. And Sport England are quite fierce that if you get rid of a pitch, you have to replace it with another pitch, and you have to, you know, they have to be consulted as part of that process. So to some degree, that discrimination, which it absolutely is, because pitches are enormous acreages of space that are dominated by men and boys. And we've been called in, again, no names will be mentioned in the description of these parks, but we've been called in to look at some parks that are basically acres of pitches and a mooga, and then, oh, we've put a skate park in. And I'm just like, oh, that's nice. And we really do need to do better. And actually, and it's just about looking at it and going, this is quite a male space. Could we do it differently? My absolute favourite of this was, it was quite a small park, and to be fair, the planning application had gone in 2014 and it'd been a lot of water under the bridge, but it had a mooga, 3 pitches, a skate park, and then the 1 acre of green space was labelled kickabout area. So but it's not just the developer's fault, and clearly it's not even just down to the councils, although they need to have, you know, it would be good if people went and looked at their playing pitches policy and said, well, this is, you know, what are we doing? Let's look at our development policies. Can we encode other forms of recreation other than pitches into the requirements, you know, to some degree, as Caroline has done in Hackney with the supplementary planning guidance. But in the end, we need to go and talk to people like Sport England and go, must we do this? This is, you know, because you could argue that under the public sector equality duty, that this is not really what councils should be doing, you know, that it's a clear discrimination against women and girls, but unpicking all of the factors in that to challenge it is going to be quite hard work.
Yeah, I think as well, it's really encouraging that developers are considering this as well and want to work with you. But we know that local authorities, in terms of revenue funding for ongoing maintenance, that they're squeezed. So how do we encourage them actually to put that budget aside? I don't know whether Caroline Woodley has got any comment on that, about in Hackney, once you've spent the capital on all the equipment and the infrastructure, you know, it is down to the local authority then to find that money to make sure it works for future generations. Caroline, can you come in and maybe talk to us about that?
Yeah, I mean, the bad news is that revenue funding in parks, even in Hackney, like barely exists. I mean, really, it could all be spent on pathways and basically making the parks kind of safe, you know, so that things don't fall down on you. We rely on capital funding. So we have to make bids for work that we feel, you know, a player is coming to end of life, we need to replace it. Or exactly what you just described, you know, in terms of the plan, the sort of leisure plan, we have got insufficient facilities and amenities for the population that we have. So for that reason, when a paddling pool, for example, came to its end of life, we were able to make the case to have some money to create a splash pad in one of our parks that would be fun and open to all, and, you know, something different. And then you're repaying that money year to year, so it's tricky. But we have also had a lot of success with sort of applications to heritage lottery funding, and then just trying to eke as much as possible out of any funding that we get, not just in terms of infrastructure and what we build, but in terms of putting people in place to help activate the space. So when we have an engagement officer, when we have someone who can focus on community partnership, suddenly you've got an opportunity to bring people to do things like walking together, as well as playing together, litter picking, that kind of thing, but also planting, things that sort of balance that idea of play, but also connection with nature, is really successful in Hackney. So yeah, community partnership, external funding, capital bids. Frankly, we've said goodbye to revenue funding.
Okay, and Sally, have you got any comment to make on that one?
Yeah, I just wanted to link it to one of the comments in the chat as well, in terms of funding, and someone made a comment about funding for consultation as well. So I think it's really important. So one of the things that obviously we're advocating for is making sure that you do consultation with girls and young people in around your local spaces, because there's so many nuances depending on the populations that you're working with and the space that you've got available. But someone made a comment about, there is no funding for consultation. What we found, obviously we're in a fortunate position in Bradford with our Jump programme, but we also get really good engagement with Friends of Park groups and with community centres. So one of our green spaces has got a community centre on site. The workshops that we've been developing up have been made so that anyone can deliver those workshops. So a community centre, someone working with a youth group would be able to deliver that work, so that it's not all reliant upon local authority resources. There's a lot of people who want to support the agenda, who would be able to do that consultation work in partnership. So just wanted to raise that as a point.
Okay, a really good point. Thank you. I might bring Susanna back in. Maybe this can be the last question, because we've got lots of comments, and then we've got also I'd just like to have some reflections at the end. But Susanna, so we have developers who employ landscape architects for their development. But how do we influence those landscape architects to be more creative and more imaginative of the options? Is there anyone that you're speaking to kind of influence them and to promote the work that you're doing?
This is literally what we do every week. Is we go and we talk to councils, and we talk to council design departments, and we talk to landscape architects, and we show all the things that there wasn't really time for in this, which is, as well as explaining the problems, just showing all the fantastic interventions that have been done across Europe. Most of which, I have to say, are cheaper than a Muga or a skate park. So it's about persuading them to think outside the box. But also what's really crucial is that it's not just about facilities provision. It's about thinking about the needs of women and girls right at the start. So about safety, about breaking areas up. So a play area, if you're doing a development, you don't want a teenage play area. Let's split that up and let's have some swings here and some seating there and the Muga over there. So there's lots of different areas for different groups to go on. So yeah, we basically show them lots of pretty pictures of nice bits of architecture, and design, which makes landscape architects very happy. And we talk to them about how to embed it into the principles of a design. And we're very happy to do that for people. Just get in touch with us.
And I think, from judging by the comments, I think all of our speakers will have an awful lot of invitations to kind of be brought into the different projects, because everyone has, wants to know more and wants to see what you've done. I think Mariam and Caroline, if you could just make a final comment on this as well, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, we found that in the workshops that we held when we had the landscape architect, we collaborated with them in terms of reviewing the output, seeing the art material. They were really on board and actually quite inspired by the ideas and the rationale that the young girls have applied to their design. So thinking about, sort of using natural design features to create that sense of safety and inclusivity through, sort of mounds or, sort of taking down fences as well. So yeah, they've been really inspired and producing really brilliant work.
Yeah, he was brilliant, wasn't he? He really did take it on board, and yeah, he was quite excited about supporting the project. Yeah,
and definitely changed his outlook. So our designer who reviewed some of the work output from the workshops, he really took on board all the feedback, but he actually said it challenged the way he would look at things as a designer and consider the viewpoint of other users, rather than just go to like a stock catalogue of tried and trusted design features. So yeah, it is a really brilliant collaborative piece of work to bring the landscape architects in to see things from a different perspective.
Well, that's really good in that, they're going away with learning from you as well, and will approach future jobs in that way as well. So, I think collectively we're getting there in the end. I think we've got lots of comments. We're going to share all of the links to your websites and everything. But if we just come on to the next slide, please.
Can I just say something very quickly? In a piece of really unfortunate bad timing, our website is just about to be renewed and it's not quite there yet. So in 2 weeks' time, 2 to 3 weeks' time, there will be a special section for councils on the website which pulls together all the documents and things you need. And the part of the reason that the materials to accompany this are going out a bit late is to make sure that you've got all the right links to the new website on it. So it's fine at the moment, but it's going to be much better, and bear with us. And there's lots of case studies and things, and it will all be much easier to find with a specific area for councils.
Brilliant. That'll be really interesting. Thank you. So if we just move on to the next slide, which is our take-home messages, which will be, just a reflection on what we've heard today and things that we need to take home. We've got all of the links there so that you'll be able to kind of look at all of the good advice that we've been given in your own time and apply them to the work that you're doing in the built environment as well. So I think one of the things that I would say about this session, and in talking to all of our speakers in preparation, was that I've worked in supported housing all of my life, and I've always thought that I've kind of included other people's opinions and consultations. And actually, girls is one of the things that I don't think I've ever done. And it's through quite a lot of self-reflection, and I felt quite emotional about it, that, all the places that I avoided as a teenage girl, but I didn't challenge it. I just accepted that. I didn't go into the park at night. I just accepted that. I walked the long way home. And then just driving around my local environment now, I'm looking at parks and paths and thinking, well, that's a place that needs to be challenged. That's a place that we could do something with. So it's been really, really thought-provoking. So I think, Susanna, if we do send out your pack in 2 weeks' time, I think that will be really good, because people on this call will have gone away and seen the world differently. So I think that'll land at the right time. So I think that's it for today's session. Again, thank you for all your fantastic comments and for spending the last hour and a half with us. Please do come back and look at the other sessions that we've got. And what we'll do is we will use all of the information that you've given us in our decision making to make sure that we tailor all future sessions to support you. So thanks again. Thanks, everyone, and goodbye from us.